Turn the video. Yeah, turn the video. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds for everyone to join the webinar, and then we will kick off. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on managing water scarcity in Asia and the Pacific. This webinar is hosted by the Australian Water Partnership. My name is Catherine Cross. I'm the Strategy and Partnerships Lead for AWP, and also hosted by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. This webinar is a launch of a publication on managing water scarcity in the Asian Pacific region, and will introduce key findings on water scarcity risks and water scarcity management that came from this publication. We also are very honored to have national perspectives on water scarcity from Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam and Indonesia. So that will be in the second part of the webinar. So to start off with, I would like to welcome Louise Whiting, who's the water program lead for FAO, to say a few welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules this afternoon to join us for this book launch of the Managing Water Scarcity in the Asia Pacific region. I can assure you this will be an interactive and very informative session that will leave you with a deeper understanding of how water scarcity is affecting the countries of this region and what we're working together to do about it. I'd like to express special thanks to our country speakers today. Kun Somkiat from the Office for the National Water Resources, Mr. Har, good to be working with you again, from Monray in Vietnam, Pak Irfan from Bappenas, and Virak Chan from the World Bank in Cambodia. Now, I'm going to use my very brief intervention today just to outline where this publication fits in our overarching Asia Pacific water scarcity program. So FAO and Australia started working together on formulating this program back in 2019. And in our preparatory work, we conducted water tenure analysis just to see what people are doing with water, where they are using it in many of the countries. We developed new tools and associated training packages to help water resource managers tackle scarcity. We conducted multiple national and regional consultations to make sure we were hitting the top priorities of governments. And we conducted an in-depth policy and governance analysis in 10 countries. And the result of that is the publication that we're very proud to launch today. Just to summarize, we'll hear more about this later, but we found that water scarcity is worsening in most countries in the region. But there is, of course, huge variety. We have a very arid and semi-arid parts of China, Pakistan, and India. And then we have the more seasonal water scarcity that is affecting most of Southeast Asia. Water scarcity is largely driven by population growth, the changing diets of those populations, the economic growth that comes with it, and of course, being worsened or exacerbated by climate change. So an important underlying philosophy of our program is that as water scarcity worsens and competition for water intensifies, it is farmers that will be asked to give up the water they have traditionally relied upon for other uses such as cities, towns, industries, and the environment. It is therefore in the interests of farmers, FAO's main clients, and food security in the region that the inevitable water reallocation that is going to happen in the future is done in a way that is evidence-based, transparent, and inclusive. Our overarching aim, therefore, is to ensure that the basic building blocks of a robust allocation system are put into place as soon as possible. This will avoid us locking in unsustainable water use and allow for adjustments over time. We will regularly be bringing countries together from across the region to discuss what is working and what is not in their efforts to tackle water scarcity as part of the program's regional cooperative platform. So tackling water scarcity is an ambitious and long-term goal requiring long-term commitment to gradual and continual policy and practice reform. And together, FAO and Australia are dedicated to the countries in this region in helping them make these changes. I would like to close by giving a special thanks to all the very excellent colleagues that contributed to this report across the 10 countries, and a special thanks to Tarek Kettleson, Amy Fallon, Simon Tilliard, and Hugh Turrell for their leadership in pulling it all together. I hope we have a very successful webinar, and thank you. Over now to John Dorr.
Yeah, good afternoon to all colleagues online. I'm John Dorr, working as the lead water specialist for Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, working in many of our partnerships across the Asia Pacific region from my base at the Australian Embassy here in Thailand. A few points. All of us have a shared interest in the stability, resilience, and prosperity of Asia Pacific region, and water is central to our own climate development, environmental, and economic challenges. Water security is a shared objective for us all, and increasing water scarcity is a shared fact for most of us. In the last 20 years, Australia has drastically reformed its approach to water management, which has required rigorous scientific and political debates between different levels of government and stakeholders. Farmers, miners, First Nations people, environmentalists, rural communities, and their urban cousins. The Australian government has made 4 commitments on the Water Action Agenda at the recent UN 2023 Water Conference. First, to renew Australia's own national water policy framework, and of course, water scarcity will be very much a part of that. Second, to deliver water infrastructure projects for First Nations communities. Third, to increase First Nations holdings of cultural and economic water entitlements. And fourth, to establish a national water quality monitoring information system to safeguard our freshwater and coastal resources. Along with 150 other countries, Australia is also supporting the call for a special envoy on water. Australia and the Asia Pacific have a long history of water cooperation. We continue to engage with water management agencies, both public and private sectors, through the diverse membership of the Australian Water Partnership and via the international cooperation activities of many of our agencies, such as the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, our Bureau of Meteorology, our leading science agency, CSIRO, and other Australian organisations on the call today and participating in this work, such as Alluvium, AMPERS, RMCG, and eWater. Across the Asia Pacific region, Australia is very pleased to be working in partnership with FAO to tackle increased water scarcity. Thanks to all the international partners that have contributed to the book that we're launching today. Gajah Mada University, Aalto University, IWRP in Vietnam, CDRI in Cambodia, Nuol, National University of Laos, Thai Water Partnership, and the Nepal Water Conservation Foundation. We see this as an important initiative for all of us. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Louise, for those opening words. I just wanted to let everyone know, we've let you know in the chat already, but there is simultaneous translation in 4 languages. We have Khmer English, Bahasa Indonesia to English, Thai to English, and Vietnamese to English. And you just press the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred language. We will next have 2 presentations. If you have any questions, please enter these into the Q&A box. Again, there should be a button at the bottom of your screen for that. So now I would like to move on to our next presentation, which is by Dr. Amy Fallon, who's the resilience lead with AMPERS. She's going to be talking about an overview of water scarcity in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Just check that I'm seeing my screen. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for the introductions, and nice to see so many people online. As just introduced, my name is Amy Fallon. I'm the Senior Resilience Specialist in AMPERS, and this morning I'm going to give a very quick 10-minute overview of water scarcity in Asia and the Pacific. And what I'm going to do is first introduce the approach to the project very briefly, and present to you what water scarcity actually is, what we mean by water scarcity, and 4 different types of scarcity, as well as then moving on to some hotspots and the evolution of water scarcity in the region between 1971 and 2010. And then I'll dive into a few highlights for some countries in the Mekong region. And for the project, we studied 10 different countries across Asia and the Pacific, and I'll focus just on a few today. And for the analysis, we first conducted a geospatial analysis of water scarcity across the whole of Asia, and then we focused in on those 10 countries in Asia and the Pacific. And next, we investigated how each of the 10 countries manage that scarcity, and then looked at the relevance to other countries facing similar issues. So overall, the project's main goal was to better our understanding of water scarcity dynamics across the region, how countries manage that scarcity, and then insights and lessons learned, including features such as water accounting and allocations and caps, which Simon will go into after me. And many different partners were involved in the project, as was introduced earlier on today. So I won't go over those too much. So first then, how do we define water scarcity? What is water scarcity? In a nutshell, it's an imbalance between fresh water supply and demand in a given domain, so a country, a region, or a river basin, where demand is exceeding supply under present institutional arrangements and infrastructure. And there are many different signs that we see of water scarcity and impacts. They might include competition for water resources, overexploitation of groundwater, and insufficient environmental water flows. Now, what we did for this study is we conducted a geospatial analysis for the years 1971 to 2010, which is when the data was available for this. And we looked at 4 different types of water scarcity using 3 core indicators. So the first type of water scarcity is too little water. So that's where low natural precipitation and runoff leads to low water availability per capita or per person. The second is too variable water, so seasonal and interannual variability in precipitation, which may lead to variable water availability, including drought. The third is overutilization of water, and this is where water use exceeds the availability or causes water quality issues and reducing availability for other water users. And finally, the fourth is poor water quality. So inadequate water quality for required uses, which may also reduce the availability of water. And of course, all of these also interact with each other. And what we did was we used 3 indicators for these 4 types of water scarcity. We used the water crowding index, which is an indicator of competition over water resources. We used the green-blue water scarcity index, which is the agricultural water scarcity, and this is an indicator of sufficiency of local water resources for agriculture. And then we looked at the water stress index, which is an indicator of excessive water use compared to availability. Now, several water scarcity hotspots showed up for the time period that we studied, as you can see on the map here. And there were high seasonal and spatial differences in water availability across the region. And this map, it provides an overall view of areas with variable or chronic water scarcity And while it doesn't show trends beyond 2010, it gives us a good picture of the many pressures that are placed on water resources. And we can surmise from this really that the current trends will be the same, if not worse. And in this time period, the population living under high or severe water scarcity more than doubled. So it went up from 1.1 billion to over 2.5 billion people. And for agricultural water scarcity, this increase was from 0.2 billion to nearly 1.5 billion people. And competition is emerging in high demand hotspots, such as cities, where water resources are either unavailable locally or that it's difficult to augment water resources. And here I just zoomed in, just so you can then see the Mekong region in a bit more detail. And as you can see, there is some variation also within countries. And we then identified a trajectory of water scarcity trends over that 40-year time period. And as you can see in this figure, as these country dots move towards the right, water shortage increases over time. And so there is a general trend towards worsening water scarcity in all of the countries that we studied. But of course, you can note that these are country averages. So there may be local conditions within a country where some areas experience extreme water scarcity, or they may not experience water scarcity at all. But overall, there is this trend towards worsening water scarcity, especially in arid countries. So I'll now briefly cover some highlights from some Mekong countries. First, Cambodia experiences water scarcity in the form of too variable water and poor water quality. And these two types of water scarcity often interact. So dry season shortages may mean that people in rural areas especially resort to using unsafe water sources. And in Cambodia, the water scarcity is particularly evident in rural areas where agriculture activities are affected by water variability. For example, only 16% of water in rural areas is safely managed in comparison to 55% in urban areas. In Cambodia, untreated wastewater is also a problem in the Delta and some cities like Phnom Penh. And as we found in other countries as well, there are signs that climate change may be worsening the variability of precipitation, and there's already evidence in Cambodia of a longer dry season and delayed wet season. And this is particularly an issue for areas such as the Tonle Sap Lake, with its flood pulse system that supports the livelihoods and food security for millions of people. And here, just quickly, I'll show this figure that shows the monthly averages of the three water scarcity indicators that we used. And this does show some seasonal differences. So for example, January, February, there are more areas experiencing water scarcity compared to other months. So moving across to Thailand, we found that Thailand experiences all four types of water scarcity, though this does differ widely between different regions. So for example, the Eastern Economic Corridor is undergoing industrial development, and this is causing increased water demand and overutilization issues. There's also issues of poor water quality across the country, especially in industrial areas and in areas where there's high population density. And recently there have been droughts which have been leading to issues of saline intrusion. And again, as with Cambodia, climate change may worsen some of these impacts, for example, especially for Thailand's agricultural sector due to increased spatial and seasonal variability of precipitation. And here I just show a figure that this demonstrates the three different indicators for water scarcity for Thailand. And as you can see, water crowding is quite a high one for Thailand. I'll also quickly touch on Lao People's Democratic Republic. So Lao PDR has relatively abundant water resources per capita, but there is high spatial and temporal variability, which is causing water scarcity issues in some areas. There are increasing water demands from the agricultural, industrial and domestic sectors, which are expected to worsen in the coming years. And irrigation intensification is already a growing problem in many areas of the country. And as in many countries in the Mekong region, hydropower reservoirs are also causing an issue with water availability. fragmenting river hydrology and changing the timing of water availability throughout the year. And finally, I'll just touch on Vietnam as well. So Vietnam also experiences all four types of water scarcity: too little water, too variable, overutilization, and poor water quality. And again, there is high spatial variation in water scarcity across the country, but the Mekong Delta in particular is facing significant issues, such as saline intrusion due to the impacts of sand mining and reduced transboundary water flows. And for Vietnam, that's quite a big issue because 63% of the country's surface water comes from transboundary rivers. And finally, groundwater overexploitation in some areas is leading to poor water quality and other issues. So that was a very short snapshot of water scarcity in the Asia Pacific overall, and then in a few countries, which you can of course read more about in the report. But overall, we can see that growing pressures such as population growth, increasing water demand and competition between water users, and pollution are worsening water scarcity across the entire region. And in the Lower Mekong, water scarcity tends not to be necessarily about chronic water scarcity, but rather variability. So that is either too much water or too little water when it is needed the most. And this shows up as seasonal water scarcity, which may be worsening in coming years in certain countries. And across the region, water quality is rapidly worsening due to pollution from agriculture and industry. And this may have serious implications for human health, ecosystems, and food security across the region. So to sum up, there is a clear need for adequate water scarcity management, which Simon will discuss next. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Amy. And we've got a few questions. So we're first going to hear from Simon, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. So I'd like to introduce Simon. So Simon Tilliard is the General Manager of Illuvium, and he's going to be talking about key insights for effective water scarcity management in the Lower Mekong region.
Thanks, Catherine. So my role today is to try and build on the excellent analysis of how water scarcity is experienced in the Asia Pacific region that Amy has just presented, and to shift to look at what policy responses to water scarcity are currently occurring in the Asia Pacific, and in particular, what lessons can be drawn from these responses on what works and what doesn't. But to first just situate this presentation in terms of the reports that are being released today, the key sections of these reports move through a narrative of why acting on water scarcity is important, to how water scarcity is being experienced in the Asia Pacific, as Amy has just presented, and to how it is and could be in the future responded to. So the presentation I'll be focusing on is really sections 5 and 6 in these reports, which is looking at the trajectories around how water is managed in the Asia Pacific and best practices for guidelines around policy for managing water scarcity. The insights that I'll present today are drawn from a comprehensive policy analysis and a set of interviews undertaken for a range of different countries across the Asia Pacific, implemented by Illuvium and AMPERS and quite a few different partners across the different countries. This process included in each country a literature review of rural development and the agricultural sector, as well as existing literature on water scarcity in each country. Institutional mapping for water scarcity to try and identify the key stakeholders involved in the management of agriculture and water scarcity. Undertaking a critical review of policy instruments using a comprehensive framework for policy analysis that have been prepared by FAO and AMPERS, particularly focusing on what has worked and what hasn't in managing water scarcity in the region. We also undertook targeted interviews with stakeholders in each country, and the purpose of the interviews was to try and supplement the literature and the policy reviews with reflections from those responsible on the ground and in each country for managing water scarcity. And all these findings were then compiled into summary and compilation reports for each country. So this analysis was undertaken across 10 different countries, and trying to get a bit of a breadth of the different sort of water scarcity contexts and responses that have been taking place. And as John mentioned, we worked in each country with people on the ground, partners on the ground, to make sure that we're really both getting access to government stakeholders involved in managing water scarcity to really get an idea of impact around the policy responses, as well as an on-the-ground context of what was happening in the country. So what did we find? The first thing is that water resources development and management across the Asia Pacific tends to follow a fairly similar trajectory, where countries move from irrigation-focused water development towards an increasing water withdrawals as economies develop. So this includes moving through several stages around state-led irrigation development, through to multi-sector development with increasing water competition, to adoption of IWM and coordinated management across the different sectors, and finally to seeking sustainable water management that tries to balance the economic, social, and environmental outcomes. And throughout the trajectory pathway, countries are constantly needing to balance and manage the shifting availability of water, as well as the shifting demands by different sectors. So to learn from other countries' experiences with water scarcity, it's useful to visualize and identify where different countries currently sit along the different stages of the trajectory, and particularly to try and identify opportunities for leapfrogging problematic stages through well-planned water management and development. There's a lot in this trajectory, and I don't really have time today to go through it in detail, but we really encourage everyone to read the relevant chapter of the reports that are being released today, and think about where your country or the countries that you work in might be situated in the trajectory, and what implications that might have for the work that you're doing there, and particularly work around water management and management of water scarcity. And the trajectory helps also to identify 4 key categories of insights around managing water scarcity in the Asia Pacific. There's some insights around needing to act early and the importance of managing scarcity for economic development. There's lessons around policy and institutional structures that need to be in place, around building blocks and planning tools that help manage water scarcity, and the critical need for sufficient resourcing, both human and financial. And I'll go into these in a bit more detail. Ahead, apologies. So firstly, it's really important to be upfront that water supply for a range of sectors is absolutely important for economic development in many countries across the Asia Pacific. The countries of the lower Mekong are all in transition. As the countries develop economically from agrarian to industrial and service economies, making sure that sufficient quality and quantity of water supplies for the industrial sector and other sectors is absolutely critical for enabling economic growth. So a clear strategy is needed on how water can be sustainably supplied to these growth sectors, while still continuing to provide water for other human and environmental needs. Because providing water users certainty about water access encourages both investment and increases productivity. But the water scarcity management trajectory shows that water scarcity is a long-term journey with no simple fix. And this is because of the balance between the complex ecological, social, cultural, and economic concerns around water. Globally, countries that have spent decades, centuries trying to deal with water scarcity still don't have all the answers. The Colorado River in America or the Murray-Darling Basin are good examples that have made good progress, but there's still much to be done. It's important also to recognise the type of scarcity experienced and build the responses accordingly. So as Amy presented, in the Mekong and most of the Asia Pacific, it's about water scarcity is about overutilisation, it's about poor water quality, and it's about variability rather than absolute scarcity issues. So our responses need to focus on those water scarcity challenges. We need to act early where possible. Once a river system or a country's water resources have become over-allocated, restraining the water use is difficult and perhaps more importantly, costly. Whereas for underdeveloped or less developed basins, there's an important opportunity to establish the effective and equitable water sharing allocation processes before the water resources are over-allocated, which will save time and resources in the long run. Finally, at the earlier stages of the water scarcity management trajectory, countries are still facing an infrastructure deficit, for example, in Cambodia and Laos. And this provides an opportunity to try and establish their national water supply infrastructure in a way that guarantees long-term water supply outcomes for communities, for farmers, and for other key water users, whilst also seeking to impact our impacts on the environment. So if there's recognition that action is needed, then what next? The first thing is to get the right policy and institutional structures in place, as they're really important in driving action on water scarcity. Some key elements to think about when establishing this framework include the critical importance of stakeholder engagement in ensuring equitable and long-lasting solutions to water scarcity are put in place, and there's broad support for these solutions. Approaches to water scarcity need to operate and link across scales and across sectors. From national policy frameworks setting a pathway to reform, to basin planning to allocate water between users, to empowering farmers and farmer water user committees at the local scale to take action as well. Linked to this, there needs to be a balance between central and decentralized responsibility for action. It's important to note here, though, that while decentralization of water management links high-level policy to local-level action, there really needs to be adequate resources put into it to succeed. Water scarcity planning needs to consider the projected impacts of climate change, which are only going to exacerbate the uncertainty of water availability. It also needs to take into account the shifting demands of water-using sectors. So adaptable and flexible management systems are needed that are supported by monitoring, periodic evaluation of progress, and of course, adaptation over time. Finally, it's useful to look for alignment and leverage from existing and emerging policy frameworks. For example, climate change policy could be an important leverage point for ensuring policy coherence and commitment to action on water scarcity as well. So with a good policy and institutional framework in place, there's a set of building blocks needed for water scarcity management. The first is sufficient institutional capacity and resourcing. So the institutions that are identified as being responsible for managing water scarcity need both the abilities and the expertise, as well as the financial and human resourcing to implement the solutions. This really means that water scarcity needs to be a priority for governments. Then regardless of where on the water scarcity management trajectory a country might be, there are a set of building blocks and tools that need to be in place to be able to effectively manage water scarcity. These include a clear understanding of water availability and water use, for example, through water accounting, a system for clearly defining water access to water or entitlements to water, and a metering of water use so you can ensure compliance and measure outcomes. So now what? These insights provide a pathway for countries in the Asia Pacific and particularly in the Mekong to improve how they are responding to water scarcity. To support countries taking up these insights, the UNFAO, as Louise has outlined, has established a regional water scarcity program which seeks to support governments to take some of these insights and put them into practice. At Alluvium, we're pleased to be supporting this program with a particular focus on the building block of understanding availability and use through the adoption of water accounting in several countries in the region. We look forward to working with you all in the room today in building the success of the Asia Pacific Water Scarcity Program and helping make a more resilient and productive Asia Pacific in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thanks for that very comprehensive presentation. So we have as I've mentioned previously, you please put your questions and answers in the chats. We have a few questions that have been answered, but maybe it might be good, Amy, if you did address the questions that have come up on the differences between water scarcity, the different indices, so the water scarcity index and the water stress index, and how groundwater is included.
Yes, sure. So I'm just opening up the chat box. So I think Marco Callio is also present today. So he was the lead on the geospatial analysis for this project. So I may refer over to him for some of these questions. But at least in terms of the difference between water crowding index and the water stress index, the water stress index is a measure of water use per available water resource. And then the water crowding index is about people. So it's measuring the amount of water resources per person, so per capita. So I hope that clarifies on that side. In terms of groundwater, I don't think, as far as I'm aware, they don't include groundwater resources. So these analyses are only on surface water. And yeah, I think Marco has also answered this better than I could. What has he said? Yeah, so the reason is that there's a greater uncertainty in large scale modeling for groundwater than there is in surface water. So yeah, unfortunately, no groundwater is included in this analysis.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a common issue with groundwater, the lack of data and information. Talking about data, another question for you, Amy, is are you aware of data collection taking place since 2010? And can it be mapped onto the indices used for the study, for this study?
Yeah, that's a good question. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to this one. I may need Marco to help out if he knows. As far as I'm aware, that it was the database that was available for that time period. I'm not sure, you know, if it's being updated now, or you know, is Marco around to help out on this one?
Yes, so hello everyone.
Ahead, Marco.
I'm Marco Kallio from Aalto University, and I was leading this analysis work. And yes, the reason why the time period is from 1971 to 2010 is that the datasets that we used are limited for this time period.
Thanks for that. So I have a question for Simon. The question is specifically on Cambodia, but it could you know, apply to all different countries in the region. So what ministries should be involved in water scarcity policy development? And I will add to that, how can we ensure intersectoral collaboration so that there is that communication and sharing between ministries?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think a multidisciplinary approach is absolutely critical. You might have a core ministry. So in Cambodia, it might be MORAM, for example, that is responsible for water, that needs to form the nucleus. But the whole point of managing water scarcity is to try and reach agreement between the different water users and therefore the different sectors represented by their ministries in how you're going to allocate out that water. And so it needs to be bringing all the different sectors in the room together to reach agreement on how to move forward in terms of allocating water. So I think you need a central ministry, which will quite often be the water-related ministry, but then they need to have a forum to bring the other ministries together to have the tricky discussions around how you allocate water as water becomes more scarce.
Thanks for that, Simon. So I have a question for Louise and potentially John. So the question was, is there similar analysis in other parts of the Asia Pacific region or other parts of the world, for example, Central Asian countries around water scarcity? And or is this planned in the future? And if you, whilst you're talking about that, if you could also add about what learning can we take from other regions like the Near East and North Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So as you mentioned, this program is modeling in many ways, in some ways not the same, an FAO program with the World Bank and IMI and many others in the NENA region, we call it, the Near East and North Africa. Obviously, they have quite a different type of scarcity up there, but their program has been going for about 7 years, longer than ours, and they have very high functioning national multidisciplinary teams And they've even set up some water accounting units within the governments, which is one of our ultimate goals. So we're hoping to pick up on many of the learnings. We also have coming out of that a global technical platform on water scarcity. I can share that link in the chat, and all of the work from our regional cooperative platform will be going up on that one as well. And we've noticed a real demand from people in this region to learn from their colleagues in that region. So that's good, and something we'll be facilitating with the program. Thanks.
And I'll just follow on, if I may. There's a very interesting question there from Tong Tran, and congratulations on an excellent paper on the Mekong Delta just published. But moving forward with the water scarcity program, first step, as was pointed out by some of the previous speakers, is really working with our partners, in Australia and beyond, to sort of lift the quality of our water accounting practices. And certainly Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, that process is already underway. And Lao could fit in there soon, Tong Tran, let's see. And Mekong River Commission is also having a look at sort of water accounting. So I don't think the analysis is done for the Mekong sub-region or any of the key basins in the region yet, but I think that working together will have a lot of a stronger handle sort of as we move forward over the next 12, 18 months. And could I also just draw attention to a question from Mark Sittereth in Cambodia, who was just keen to see the water scarcity definition that is being used, and perhaps someone would be able to put that up again in a minute. Thank you. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I was going to put that to Amy. So there's the question from Ton Tran about transboundary water scarcity, and do you think this issue is the case in the whole Mekong region, and is Cambodia defined as a water scarce country? I see you've started typing the answer to that question, but maybe you could share your thoughts there.
Yes, sure. Yeah, thanks for the interesting questions. And I think, at least in terms of transboundary water scarcity or transboundary issues, that could be a whole other webinar probably in itself when we're talking about transboundary problems. I think in terms of scarcity, it would be a problem of, it's just water allocation and sharing, transboundary sharing. So of course we have a lot of agreements in the region for water sharing and allocations, but at least at the moment when we're looking at scarcity in the Delta in Vietnam, you can attribute some of that to decisions that are being made upstream. So I think it's maybe more of a question for the management side and the government side of water scarcity. Like how do we share scarcity between countries? So I hope answers that question. And then the second question was it about Cambodia? Let me just find.
Yeah, how is Cambodia a water scarce country? I guess looking at those different types of water scarcity, where does it fit in there?
Yeah, so I mean, when we did the analysis, it's not that Cambodia is coming out, with all these, bright, a map full of, parts of with water scarcity, but it's more that there are indicators that there's a trend, is moving towards water scarce conditions, and it's more related to seasonal scarcity. So there's already quite a lot of evidence, for the Tonle Sap, for example, that the Philippines system is changing, that the dry season is becoming prolonged. I think it's already roughly a month longer than it was in the 90s. So that's causing issues. So overall, if you're looking at it on an overall perspective, then maybe it would be easy to say that it's not water scarce, but there are certain trends within the country that seem quite concerning in terms of scarcity. And also you've got to think about water quality as well. So there's a lot of areas, rural areas in Cambodia, where the water supply is not, it's not clean water. So in our definition of water scarcity, we're also thinking about water quality. So the water may be there, but then is it usable for the things that you need it for? But yeah, a good question though.
Catherine, could I just jump in quickly on the transboundary discussion? So FAO has a lot of work on transboundary water in the Mekong, but this program, we want to sort of keep that quite separate because we really want to bring countries together to talk about what is working and what is not working at the national level. And I think everybody here will agree as soon as you get to that transboundary discussion, it brings in a whole lot of geopolitical and other complications. So if we can just keep this really focused on national level issues, I think that would be really good just for the program in terms of focusing on what's really important right now. And then we, of course, transboundary, very important, especially for Vietnam, but not something that we want to specifically address with this program. We can't do it all. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Louise. So we have quite a few more questions. I'll put the next one to Simon. There's a question from Sokon Su on the building blocks that you talked about in the presentation. So the question, as I understand it, is in order to strengthen ecosystems for improving water resource management, what are the main sector building blocks that should be focused on? And maybe a broader question, what were main issues and opportunities for improvement of each building block?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I guess there's a few ways to answer it. I guess the first is to emphasize that the policy review didn't just focus on one sector. It considered agriculture and water sectors as primarily, but we also looked at a range of other issues as well. And so the building blocks are intended to be something that can be adopted across different sectors. In terms of the issues and opportunities for improvement of each building block, I think in terms of the building blocks we've presented, there's fairly limited existence of those in most of the countries at the moment. And so really what's needed is some of that initial investment in things like hydromet stations to then provide sufficient data to then be able to talk about how much water is there and what's being used. And some of those issues are going to be explored in the first phase of the water scarcity program through looking at how we might do water accounting in each country and working with experts in each country and government agencies in each country to understand what the restrictions might be to things like undertaking water accounting across the different countries. And therefore, where's the availability to bring in things like satellite data sets, et cetera, that can help offset some of the challenges that might be there.
Thanks, Simon. Good point. There are many different tools that we can tap into to support. So there's a question on groundwater and urban water, which I will. There's two questions, one from Wayan Tambun and one from Satyata Sim. I guess either Amy or Simon or Louise and John, if you're able to answer this. So the first question is, how is groundwater being considered in this discussion, considering like there's such huge groundwater use, especially around big cities and high populated areas? And then the second question somewhat related to this is urban water shortage seasonally accounted for in the country water scarcity? So I guess it could be both from surface water and groundwater. So I'll put that out there to Simon, Amy, Louise, John.
Okay, it's all quiet. I'll go first. So the people that have done this particular study can acknowledge that, one study can't do everything and can't necessarily tackle and answer all of the groundwater sort of issues. But I think an Asia Pacific water scarcity program and water accounting in every country certainly does and has to sort of take account of groundwater. And the whole point of high quality water accounting is to try and clarify where is all of the water in a country, how is it being used, of what quality. And so this is, to me, a very helpful overview study. But once we are sort of digging into our own countries, we know that we have to do more. So for us in Australia, we are, and other Australians on the line may add, we of course are trying to provide sort of a 24-hour sort of water balance across the whole country via the Bureau of Meteorology. So every country has its own methods and resources, but groundwater is absolutely part of the picture. And Suchita's question about urban water, I mean, again, Asia Pacific, so much of the region is highly urbanized. Again, every country, as we look at our own situation, sort of, it's not just a rural process, a water scarcity examination. It's also, is there enough water in our urban settlements? When is there, when isn't there? What is the quality? What can we do about it? And that last point is the main one. What can we do about it? You know, we understand, let's try and understand the problem we're all facing, and then work out what we're going to do about it in each of our countries and learn what we can from each other. Thanks. Back to others.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, John. We're going to have to move to the second part, to the panel discussion, but if Simon and Amy, if you have any final words, Louise as well, before we move to that, please go ahead.
Yeah, I might just say a final word. It also links to a question here from Robert Boss as well around, wouldn't it be better having a top-down approach to try and get action on water scarcity rather than one sort of ministry trying to make action? And I think the core to this for me a bit is the need for governments to start understanding the importance of water scarcity and how it's going to have, if we don't focus on it, it is going to have huge economic impacts over time. And so it's not just the interest of one ministry, it actually is the interest of all the ministries. Agriculture can't operate without it. The energy, if you've got hydropower going, can't operate without it. So I think part of the process of the water scarcity program is about trying to get information out there about actually this is an important issue for countries and needs to become a priority.
Thanks, Simon. Amy, any final thoughts before we move to the next part of the webinar?
Yeah, I mean, I'm spotting some more questions in the chat, so I can answer maybe they're a bit easier. But I'll just say a quick thank you for the session and for the interesting questions. But yeah, I agree that this is a problem across the whole region that needs it needs collaboration between different sectors, different ministries. So often we're talking about these things just in our little water bubble, and it'll be good to continue the work that's going on. And yeah, I'll leave it at that and continue in the chat. But thanks.
Thank you for that, Louise.
Yeah, no, nothing from me. Let's hear from the countries. Keen to hear from them. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so thank you to everyone for setting the scene. We're going to now move to our panel discussion, which is going to be facilitated by Dr. Paradi Somath, who's the principal hydrologist at eWater, and he will introduce the panelists. So over to Dr. Paradi.
Thank you, Catherine. So today, panelists, we have 4 people. We have Mr. Virachan from Cambodia, who is the senior water resources management specialist from the World Bank. The second one is Dr. Siriwat Bunbichai, who is the irrigation engineer professional level from the Office of the National Water Resources of Thailand. The third one is the Lao PDR, the Deputy Director General, Department of Water Resources Management of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment from Vietnam. And finally, Mr. Mohamed Ifan Saleh, Director of Water Resources from the Ministry of National Development Planning from Indonesia. So to begin with this, I would like to invite a very short reflection from each of the panel of the 4 countries on the presentation in the session 1. So to start with this, I would like to invite Mr. Virachan to give a very short reflection. What do you learn and hear from the session 1 presentation? How is the reflection from Cambodia look like? Mr. Virachan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Paradi, and Good afternoon, everyone, for those who live in the regions. It's my great honor to share the perspective and also the reflection from the presentation. The presentation provides a lot of comprehensive information and data, and thanks a lot that the engagement from the local agency, research agencies that come in place, working with the Australian Water Partnership to conduct all of this study and assessment as well. It is important, of course. You all really bring a lot of scientific data, using the model to showcase a different scenario and the assessment in terms of the impact on the water availability that bring the story of water scarcity on board. Then it also useful as well because you also use a technology to attach with all of those assessment and finding, which is giving a more scientific evidence to showcase that each country have a different level of impact and different level of problem in terms of the water scarcity. The perspective from Cambodia, I think, while these important of the scientific data has brought into this platform and the discussion, I would also want to hear more in terms of voices of from the water users as well, right? So it's very important to hear who really have a direct impact from the water scarcity. Sometimes the data, we can also, talk to our scientists itself, talk to the researcher itself. But when you talk to the people at the grassroots, it's very difficult to interpret those data into the reality and the situation that they face. So if I would, we could bring some case study. We could sit down with farmers. We could sit down with the water supply operators. We could sit down with the fishermen to understand what they face in the last 5 years in terms of the water scarcity. And those, we have to answer the question, who impacted from those water scarcity issues? The second question we can ask, and we can have a chit chat with those community people, sitting on the ground or under the tree, whatever, wherever you can talk to them, give them an openness for discussions when they face this problem, right? So when they face this problem, is it during the rainy season? Is it the dry season? Or it's happened already periodically or seasonally, or almost every years already that they face from the last 5 or 10 years. And then we have to also ask the questions, where is impacted? Is it impacted in the community or impacted beyond or outside the community? And then these are the questions that the community can tell us exactly, are they affecting from the water scarcity or not? So validating with those voices of the community, you could also see whether the scientific assessment could confirm the problem or not. The second point I would talk about. Last week, the World Bank conducted the system country diagnostic consultation, stakeholder consultations. We received around 200 participants from NGO, from development partners, and from the community and the government representative as well. It surprised me actually when the question from the systematic country diagnostic was putting on the screen. What are your main priority challenges that the country faced in the last 5 years, and you expected to face in another next 5 or 10 years? So a lot of people talking about skill, a lot of people talking about infrastructure issues. But then there's a lot of people, especially the people from not the water ministry itself. I think we are talking about the institutions and the policy. The people from the Ministry of Agriculture, the people from Ministry of Industry, Science and Technology, who are in charge of potable water supply, Ministry of Environment, they were talking about the issues of the water security. So it's mean that even the Ministry of Water was silent, but there's a lot of people who receive the benefit from water, or the ministry who really engage with the water security or water resource management, have the same impact or have the feels of the impact from the water security or water scarcity issues. So I think listen to those policymaker and those participants, give you one more perspective. How could the scientific data be translated into a better communication messages to policymaker to really, attract their attentions into what they can do? And this is really the issue that happened, or it just only the data say, or it is coming from the perspective of the researcher alone. So I think the water securities assessment should also including all of those key messages to recommend the right audience so that it would help those right audience understand the major issues. I would stop here. I hope this covered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Virak. So you provide the insight, how could we improve our research here? And it's, like John mentioned, that every research has the limitation. One of our limitation in this research is we use the global data set. So it's at the macro scale. It's not yet to the catchment or the basin or river scale yet. So we have to go down a little bit more. But what we just pointed out is the grassroots voice and information at a very low level. So this is the way that we can validate the result from this macro scale. So this is a next step that we need to consider, and the study team and involved people should consider to continue proving the result of the study. And one last point that you make is how to translate this, scientific information and the result of the finding into a simple way for the communication. Thank you, Mr. Virak. So to move on, I would like to invite Mr. Lao Manha from Vietnam to share your national view on what is the finding from the session number 1. Mr. Ha, please.
Vâng, xin chào tất cả quý vị. Thì đối diện với những thực tế qua những năm gần đây, từ phải đối mặt những cái trận hạn hán lịch sử trong vòng hơn 100 năm qua, gây ra những
It looked like that we have an interrupted communication from Mr. Ha.
Nước Việt là để hạn hán sẽ tiếp
We can buy more a little bit more time for Mr. Ha to fix the technical issue, and with this I would like to invite Dr. Sriwat Bunbichai from the Bureau of the Office of the National Water Resource of Thailand to give the perspective from his national interest. Dr. Sriwat.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Very well, Dr.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Paradis. Yeah. For the first presentation in Laos, we are agree with all that is Laos. For Thailand, we face little water, but actually not a little water, but we have the limit of the water storage. And also for the climate change or climate resilience also affect the water supply side and increase in the water demand. And seawater intrusion also, we are facing this. It's not only for in the dry season, but for in the rainy season also in the summertime, because it will affect water supply for the Thailand capital. Yeah, but anyway, we also have the soft management that we call the 4 pillar of the water resources management. This is the like kind of the solution or like a framework or guideline for the Thailand water management. Its 4 pillars include the Water Resources Act and 20-year water resources master plan. And the third pillar is the organization. And the last one is the innovation and technology. And this is the, I think is cover all for the how we can address the water scarcity. Let me begin with the 20-year water resources master plan. It is served as the long-term framework and guideline for the water management in Thailand. And we also have the water allocation plan and water seasonal measure as the season guideline as a bit before the season. And we assess how much water availability before the season that we have. And we also forecast the total how much the water demand and climate resilience that we consider to formulate the seasonal strategy. And I think one more that is important thing is like organization. That is the key, is the core of the policy implementation for the stakeholder and listen to the problem from the water user. And for the organization that we have the 3 level. The biggest one is the national level that we call the National Water Resources Committee. That Prime Minister is the chairman. And for the lower scale is like river basin scale. We also have the committee for this. And the local one is the water user level. And we use this organized as a mechanism to improve our managing and controlling water from the upstream to the downstream to enhance the water resources management efficiency. And we also have the innovation and technology as one of our pillar that is from national and international that we will adopt to improve water resources management for the Thailand, becoming the modern and to be more accurate to serve the and we also have the tool. Let me show you as two. It's like one is the national Thai water application. We use this for the water monitoring and forecasting. Yeah, and also the Thai water plan application that we use to indicate our water project planning. And we apply this formula combined with the seasonal water resources. There was no drought area in Thailand. And I think this information will be useful for us and we will consider use for the future strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siwat. You, in just a very short time, you elaborate a very comprehensive input for this workshop. And I do have a follow-up question, but I would reserve it a little bit later. So I would like to give a chance to the other participants, to panelists to give their view, their national view first. So next, I would like to invite Mr. Mohammed Ifan Saleh to give your perspective from Indonesia.
Thank you, Dr. Pradesh. Good afternoon, Asia time for all of us. For Indonesia, I'm Irfan from the National Development Planning Agency. First, I want to congratulate Australian Water Partnership and also the FAO for dispatching this report and very important report for us in this region. And in particular for Indonesia, we can see that this report also find the scarcity already took place in several regions, particularly in Java Island and some part of the certain part of Indonesia. As we know that if we see in general term of fresh water availability in Indonesia, we are still in the top 10 of the largest water availability based on the FAO statistics and or also maybe in the World Bank. But if we see the distribution is the problem, because we see that Java Island in particular, it's the water availability may be only 6% compared to the whole area of Indonesia, but the population is more than 52 or 54% now. It means in this only this island, single island, we have more than 120 million people lives there, and it's also still become being the source of food production in Indonesia. Almost half of the rice production is also came from this island, and that's why we realize that this water scarcity is already happening in this country, and we can see that all this recommendation and all the policy findings from this report is very important for us. But in particular for Indonesia, we are now doing some action for this. Since 10 years ago, we started to construct a lot of dams and reservoirs. We are finishing now 65 reservoirs. 61 of them maybe will be finished in 2024, and hopefully we can increase the availability for water in the dry seasons for that. And the second action for us now, we are conducting some efficiency activities for the water use, particularly in agricultural practices, as also recommended by this report. And I think we agree for that we should now consider how to make the water use become more efficient, particularly for irrigation and agriculture practice, because we now need more water for water supply for domestic and industry. And that's become our next challenges and our actions. And the third one, we are also conserving our water sources, the existing one. We have in Indonesia more than 800 lakes, and we have several big lakes also. And we are now conserving and also restoring the availability of water and also the condition of the environmental around the lakes. And that's a kind of action that we are conducting now. But in terms for this issue for Asia country, I think we face same challenges, and also because we have in the same background and culture, and also for people like we are mostly eating rice and that kind of activities that also requires a lot of water. And also from the report, I want to highlight also the recommendation for the institutions. Maybe this is our common challenges in this region, because we realize that that's one of our challenges that we can also conduct and address the solution together and improve our capacity for managing water as based on the best practice and more efficiently, like in the professional organization, and also some coordination team that can become our action as a government or as a community to address this water security and water scarcity problem. I think that's all for us from Indonesia. Get back to moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. So the study team and all of us here are very happy to hear the confirmations of the result of the study is valid for Indonesia. And we are very grateful to hear that Indonesia is ready to have countermeasures that prepare for more storage and infrastructure to cope with the changing climate. So to move on, we would like to invite Mr. Ha from Vietnam to give his view on the presentations of this study. Mr. Ha, please.
Vâng, xin lỗi quý vị, thì do cái hệ thống đường truyền nên tôi xin phép xin lỗi, quý vị có nghe thấy rõ không ạ?
Very good.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn. Thì tôi xin phép được trình bày, do thời gian có hạn chế, tôi xin phép được nói hết sức ngắn gọn liên quan đến cái vấn đề về tình hình ở Việt Nam, cũng như là một số những cái đề xuất của chúng tôi trong việc mà xử lý các vấn đề hạn hán ở Việt Nam, cũng như xử lý các vấn đề hạn hán ở trong khu vực. Thì tôi xin phép được bắt đầu. Như quý vị đã biết thì Việt Nam của chúng tôi trong những năm vừa qua, đặc biệt là trong vòng 10 đến 15 năm trở lại đây, thì đã đối mặt với rất nhiều các thách thức về tài nguyên nước, trong đó vấn đề về hạn hán thiếu nước đang xảy ra ngày càng nghiêm trọng. Vì Việt Nam là một trong những quốc gia chịu ảnh hưởng lớn nhất của biến đổi khí hậu. Và theo tôi nghĩ rằng là tài nguyên nước là một trong những yếu tố chịu tác động lớn nhất của Việt Nam trong thời gian qua dưới tác động của biến đổi khí hậu. Và theo đánh giá của các tổ chức trên thế giới, thì nếu những cái thiệt hại mà liên quan đến nước Việt Nam vẫn diễn ra theo chiều hướng xấu như thế này, thì dự kiến đến năm 2050 thì nó sẽ ảnh hưởng rất lớn đến cái GDP của Việt Nam, và có thể giảm đến 3% năm 2050 và đến 7% năm 2100. Thì do thời gian rất là hạn chế, thì tôi xin phép được nói về những cái định hướng mà giải quyết những cái vấn đề về liên quan đến hạn hán thiếu nước của Việt Nam đã và đang thực hiện. Thứ nhất là hiện nay một trong những nhiệm vụ trọng tâm của Việt Nam đó là hoàn thiện một hệ thống pháp luật đồng bộ. Hiện nay chúng tôi đang xây dựng cái hoàn thiện pháp luật về quản lý tài nguyên nước. Tại vì ở Việt Nam thì có rất nhiều các bộ luật liên quan đến quản lý nguồn nước, thì đây cũng là một những hạn chế nó góp phần là không xử lý được cái vấn đề hạn hán. Thì hiện nay chúng tôi đang tập trung giải quyết triệt để, và chúng tôi hy vọng rằng trong 1-2 năm tới là sau khi Quốc hội của Việt Nam ban hành cái luật mới thì sẽ có những chính sách cụ thể để giải quyết các vấn đề về tài nguyên nước, trong đó là đặc biệt là vấn đề hạn hán. Hiện nay Việt Nam chúng tôi đã hoàn thiện các hệ thống quy hoạch tài nguyên nước trên các lưu vực sông. Thì đây là một trong những nền tảng để chúng tôi triển khai các giải pháp đối phó cái tình trạng hạn hán, đặc biệt là các lưu vực sông ở miền Trung Tây Nguyên cũng như khu vực ở đồng bằng sông Cửu Long. Đây là một trong những công cụ hết sức đắc lực của chúng tôi. Ngoài ra hiện nay tôi nghĩ là không phải ở Việt Nam mà các nước ở châu Á đang rất thiếu, đó là một cái hệ thống hỗ trợ ra quyết định trên toàn bộ ở Việt Nam nói chung, cũng như là trên các lưu vực sông nói riêng. Đây cũng như là đang thiếu rất nhiều cái hệ thống về thông tin cơ sở dữ liệu tài nguyên nước, khí tượng thủy văn để hỗ trợ cái quá trình ra cái quyết định điều hòa phân bổ tài nguyên nước trên các lưu vực sông ở Việt Nam, đặc biệt là xử lý vấn đề hạn hán thiếu nước. Và tôi nghĩ đây là một trong những cốt lõi, cũng không ở Việt Nam đâu mà kể cả những nước tiên tiến trên thế giới cũng đang gặp phải vấn đề này. Nên là mặc dù ở Việt Nam chúng tôi là nguồn lực đầu tư cho vấn đề tài nguyên nước rất hạn chế, tuy nhiên rằng là chúng tôi cũng đang hết sức là cố gắng để làm sao có thể là huy động các nguồn lực, không phải là chỉ nguồn lực ở nhà nước, mà có thể là huy động nguồn lực của các tổ chức cá nhân, của các doanh nghiệp trong việc mà bảo vệ tài nguyên nước ở Việt Nam, đặc biệt là xử lý các vấn đề mà hạn hán thiếu nước đang ngày càng nghiêm trọng ở Việt Nam như hiện nay. Thì như quý vị đã biết thì Việt Nam 60% tài nguyên nước của Việt Nam là từ nước ngoài, như các lưu vực sông là Hồng, Thái Bình hay là Mekong. Thì như vậy là chúng tôi chỉ có 40% cái lượng nước mà nội sinh mà thôi. Chính vì vậy mà giải quyết vấn đề nước xuyên biên giới cũng là một trong những nhiệm vụ trọng tâm của chúng tôi. Trong đó mà hiện nay thì với cái việc mà các nước phía thượng nguồn xây dựng các công trình điều tiết nước rất lớn, cộng với cả cái việc phát triển kinh tế xã hội ở phía Trung Quốc, Lào, Cambodia, Thái Lan cũng đã ảnh hưởng khá lớn đến cái việc mà sử dụng nguồn nước ở Việt Nam của chúng tôi. Nên là trong thời gian tới thì vấn đề mà quản lý nguồn nước các xuyên biên giới là một trong vấn đề trọng tâm. Cũng có thể là một số nước như các bạn cũng gặp phải, nhưng ở Việt Nam là đặc thù là 60% là phụ thuộc vào nguồn nước nước ngoài. Và đặc biệt là ở Việt Nam thì tất cả hệ thống chính trị, Đảng và Nhà nước của chúng tôi đặc biệt quan tâm đến cái vấn đề về đảm bảo an ninh nguồn nước. Trong đó là làm sao mà để đến năm 2030 và 2050 cái chỉ số an ninh nguồn nước của Việt Nam của chúng tôi có thể tiệm cận được với các nước phát triển ở trong khu vực và trên thế giới. Thì chúng tôi nghĩ lúc đó thì cái vấn đề về xử lý vấn đề hạn hán thiếu nước ở Việt Nam sẽ được khắc phục nếu như mà thực sự là chúng ta dành một nguồn lực thích đáng cho công tác quản lý tài nguyên nước. Vâng, thì do thời gian có hạn thì tôi xin phép bài trình bày của tôi hết sức ngắn gọn. Và xin chân thành cảm ơn quý vị đã lắng nghe.
Thank Mr. Ha. We are very grateful to hear your plan, Vietnamese plan, to overcome the challenges that will happen in the future, including the water management issue of transboundary water resources management. So look at the time. Now we are moving to the next section. Is the plenary question and answer to all our panelists. So I would like to remind the participants, when you have a question, please drop your question into Q&A chat box. And there, it would be good if you can specifically mention the question to whom. So we have 4 representatives from all countries: Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. So if you can identify your question to whom that you would like to ask, it would be very grateful for our team. So to start populating the question into the chat box, I would like to start my questions. Since Mr. Ha just mentions finished his national view, I would like to have a follow-up question on what kind of technology or tool or processes that Vietnam consider that is useful to support how to overcome the water scarcity in your country. What are the tools or technology that you plan to implement to overcome your water scarcity? Mr. Ha.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn anh về cái câu hỏi rất hay. Thì thực ra ở tôi nghĩ rằng cái công cụ cũng như cái công nghệ mà áp dụng ở Việt Nam hiện nay thì chắc chắn là so với các nước tiên tiến này không thể nào bằng được. Và tôi nghĩ rằng ở Thái Lan cũng như Indo hay các nước lân cận thì cái việc sử dụng về mặt công cụ thì có lẽ là giống nhau. Tuy nhiên thì cái việc mà áp dụng công cụ nào phù hợp với điều kiện nguồn nước thì tôi nghĩ đấy mà là quan trọng. Và bản thân theo quan điểm cá nhân tôi thì một trong những cái vấn đề quan trọng nhất đó chính là cái hệ thống cơ sở dữ liệu. Và hiện nay Việt Nam đang rất thiếu cái vấn đề về cơ sở dữ liệu. Mặc dù hiện nay chúng tôi đang quản lý với rất nhiều cơ sở dữ liệu của các bộ ngành, nhưng cái vấn đề về phân tán cái cơ sở dữ liệu là một trong những vấn đề mà chúng tôi đang phải đối mặt. Cũng như là cái việc mà xử lý rất nhiều các vấn đề trong mâu thuẫn sử dụng nước của các ngành phía thượng lưu và hạ lưu các lưu vực sông là một trong những vấn đề chúng tôi gặp phải. Tôi nghĩ rằng nó không hẳn là phụ thuộc lớn về mặt công cụ, nhưng công cụ chỉ là một trong cái bài toán để chúng ta đưa ra, hỗ trợ chúng ta đưa ra quá trình ra quyết định mà thôi. Nhưng mà tôi nghĩ quan trọng nhất để có thể xử lý vấn đề hạn hán đó là cái cơ chế phối hợp giữa các bộ ngành, giữa các địa phương ở thượng hạ lưu và giữa các đối tượng sử dụng nước trên lưu vực, và cái vấn đề hợp tác nước giữa các lưu vực nước sông xuyên biên giới trong vấn đề xử lý vấn đề hạn hán, cũng như cái cung cấp thông tin dữ liệu để phục vụ cái việc điều phối giám sát các hoạt động sử dụng nước trên các lưu vực sông. Thì tôi đối nghĩ 12 nữa là tôi nghĩ rằng là cái quan trọng nhất ở Việt Nam hiện nay đó chính là cái thay đổi cái nhận thức của của người dân trong cái việc bảo vệ tài nguyên nước, cũng như cái việc mà sử dụng nước hợp lý, tiết kiệm. Và theo hiến pháp của Việt Nam chúng tôi ấy, thì nước được coi là tài sản và phải được quản lý đúng giá trị của nó. Tuy nhiên thì thực tế là người dân vẫn chưa hiểu đủ cái giá trị của tài nguyên nước mang lại, dẫn đến cái việc mà sử dụng nước, đặc biệt là những cái vùng mà hạn hán thiếu nước nghiêm trọng ấy, thì lại sử dụng nước hết sức là không hiệu quả, dẫn đến là vùng thiếu nước lại càng thiếu. Đó là một trong những cái vấn đề mà Việt Nam đang cố gắng tập trung để giải quyết. Vâng, xin hết ạ.
There is a question in the box go to Mr. Riak. You mentioned in Cambodia there is a fragmented water management from different sectors: agriculture, industrial water use, and rural water supply. So this is a silo thinking by each sector. So in your opinion, what would be the best way? How could we bring those sectors together and to come up with a holistic approach for water resource management?
Okay, I thank for the question, and it's very important questions to answer from the institutional and coordination point of view. Yeah, I think this coordination would not just about meetings. I would say, you know, sometimes we often confuse that when the people sitting in the room, 20 people representing all the agencies, development partner in the room, we call it coordination. But I would call it coordination in different way, right? So we talk, we plan, and then we act. And then we look at the result together. I call it more effective coordination rather than just counting number of meetings that we have met right everywhere. And then we spend a lot of money on coffee break and many other things as well. I'm just joking. But this is the reality, right? So we have to bring those discussion to a little bit further rather than just meeting. But as I said, you have to talk about the issue, and then we have to talk about solution, and we have to talk about planning, and then we have to talk about acting, putting the actions. So putting action means you have to also plan individually, but then you have to consolidate those planning to implement it in more collectively, and also having more result oriented and setting, you know, a timeline clearly with a strong vision as a joint vision, not individual vision. So I would call it as more a coordination. So this also could also link to many aspects in the country from my personal view. Water scarcity, it have a number of contributing challenges in order to address water scarcity. If you're talking about water scarcity, don't talk just about water. You have to talk about human resources scarcity. You have to talk about resource scarcity, I mean the investment scarcity. And you have to talk about policies addressed to the challenge scarcity as well. So all of those scarcity integrated together in order to address those water scarcity. I agree one of the comment that Dr. Sutirit has mentioned. Cambodia has a lot of water. It's the way how we define the definitions of water scarcity. Exactly, we receive 5 billion cubic meters per year based on the data, but the capacity that we can manage it, only 5 to 7% of those managements. In addition to that, we use the infrastructures of storage, dam to manage the water, but we also look at the function of those infrastructure as well. Is it fully functional, or is it really optimizing the function of those infrastructures that could providing the services to the water user? So if I don't look at the definition from the finding, I would say water scarcity could define in a way where the water can be managed and can be services to the water users. everywhere across the country where the water demands are. So that would be very useful to see the ratios of the demand and supplies, whether it is scarce, whether it is shortage, or whether it is enough or more than enough. So I just extend my explanation a little bit from the question, but I just want to think through more in terms of the definition rather than just making assumptions that Cambodia face water scarcity for the whole season or for the whole years. Thank you.
There are many questions in Cambodia and Vietnam on the water scarcity. But to give Mr. Vedat and Mr. Ha a break, I would like to ask to Mr. Mohammed about the tool and technology that Indonesia government plan to deal with the changing climate in the next 10 years. Do you have a plan to upgrade your tool and technology? For example, data center, databases, or modeling, even your geography. Geography of Indonesia is quite diverse comparing to the continental geography. You have many islands. What are the tools and technology that the government is planning right now to overcome the next 10-year climate, the changing climate?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Yeah, I think we agree that data and information is very crucial for managing water resources because, yeah, as we know that we cannot manage something that we don't know, we don't have data for that. That's why it's very crucial. And for Indonesia, no, because for overall water resources data management, we already have some like interministerial decree or like agreement to interoperable or sharing our data together. But the way that we will implement it is we still need a lot of improvement for that. And now regarding water resources, we are developing our capacity just to improve the flood problem and also forecasting for the flood event, but not for the water scarcity yet. Because I think for the flood, we need this type of more emergency type of action. And that's why we need the good tools for managing data to make a fast response. But for the overall water river basin management, we already established our river basin organization in all regions in Indonesia, whether it belongs under the central government or under the regional government. And we are now strengthening all these river basin organizations to become a unit that can manage data and information in the regions. And we support it by constructing the national database to integrate all the system. And we are grateful that some of our international partners also support us for this. And hopefully in the coming years, we will have the established system for the water resources national database. And yeah, for that also, I think I also want to say that today, for 18th of May next year, we will have the World Water Forum in Bali. I hope all of us can join us and I can join that event. And I think we can discuss more about this, how to improve our capacity together to manage water. Thank you. Give back to Paradise.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. To move on, I have one question for Mr. Dr. Siriwat. So it seems like Thailand is quite advanced comparing to the other countries in terms of water management. You have come up with the reorganization, rearrangements of water agency to under one roof of the Office of National Water, Office of the National Water Resources. And you also have quite advanced tool and technology that is maintained by High Institute of Geoinformatics and Climate. So with this, you has learned a lot of good lessons and also challenges. So can you help us to point out 2 or 3 priorities that you has overcome, and it could be, you know, a priority for the developed country to take to follow your footsteps to more advanced, you know, approach for water management and to overcome water scarcity. Dr. Siriwat.
I would like to highlight 4 pillars that we are using for the Thailand water resources management. And this is, I think, we can apply for the other country, or we can use as a guideline for the other country. It like I would like to highlight the pillar 2. It like a 20-year master plan. It like we can use as a long-term framework or guideline. For it not for the water scarcity, but we also going for the flood and water quality. And for this, it like for the, but actually for this master plan we implement for 5 years already, but we still find the gap. So now we are improving this according to the climate change and current situation and technology and so on. And for the technology and innovation that I would like to highlight, like not only for the technology from our country, but for the developing or other country. It's like we can have kind of the MOU between the agency, water related agency, and we also have kind of the like we apply for the satellite data or future climate data that we use for this innovation. And one more thing is like that I mentioned earlier is like we use application for the specific purpose, and that is like national water, Thai water, that we use for the water monitoring and forecasting. And also, and one more thing that important is like water accounting. But if we know now, it's like we are doing on that, on the water accounting. If we know how much water that we have, or how much the demand, then we can address and we can like enhance the water management efficiency. And one more thing is like important thing is like prevention plan on drought and flood problem. It like this we can use as a guideline for the specific area, and we can address is at the how to call that, like we can solve the problem at the exact spot. Thank you.
Thank Dr. Siriwat. We still have 2 more minutes to end up these sessions. So I would like to ask one question from the Q&A chart to Vietnam. So there is a question saying Vietnam is facing a lot of problems on water scarcity and water use, contaminated water. How Vietnam governments solve the water crisis and the freshwater water supply to the citizens that who live in the lower Mekong River? And how is the water supply delivery governed in the rural area of Vietnam Delta? Mr. Ha. While waiting for Mr. Ha, maybe there is another question that I would like to ask to the study team. There is a question from our participants saying, asking if our study cover Afghanistan Amy or Marco, can you have a quick answer?
Việt Nam.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me okay? Did you just directed that question to me?
Yes, the question is
Yes.
that does our study cover Afghanistan?
Right, no, I don't think so at this, I'm just gonna check, but it was focusing on the Asia and Pacific region. So those the 10 countries that I put in my slides, which were, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Fiji, and Australia. So at the moment, those 10 were the focus for this study.
Thank you, Amy, for clarifications. Mr. Ha, if you are online, please have answered the questions from Vietnam. Did you get the questions?
Vâng. Xin lỗi, cái hệ thống của chúng tôi lại nó có liên quan đến vấn đề về đường truyền. Thì liên quan đến câu hỏi về cái giải quyết vấn đề của người dân ở phía hạ lưu sông Mekong thì thưa quý vị, thì thực ra là việc sử dụng nước sinh hoạt ở hạ lưu sông Mekong ở Việt Nam là một trong những cái vấn đề rất lớn ở Việt Nam đang gặp phải. Thứ nhất là với cái đặc điểm về cái chế độ thủy văn, nước mặt cũng như đặc điểm về phân bố cái nguồn nước ngầm, nó cũng là một trong những cái trở ngại đối với việc cấp nước cho người dân ở vùng này, đặc biệt là những cái tỉnh thành ở khu vực ven biển. Với cái việc mà nước ngầm ở các khu vực ven biển đa số là đã bị nhiễm mặn, nên cái việc mà tiếp cận các nguồn nước mà không bị mặn trong việc mà sản xuất nông nghiệp cũng như sinh hoạt là rất khó khăn. Và cái nguồn nước chính để cấp thì cơ bản sẽ là cái nguồn nước mặt ở trên cái lưu vực hạ lưu sông Mekong này. Thì chính phủ Việt Nam đã ban hành cái quy hoạch tài nguyên nước trên lưu vực sông Mekong. Trong đó là về cơ bản thì mấu chốt của quy hoạch vẫn là phải ưu tiên cái sử dụng nguồn nước mặt cho việc cái cấp nước cho hoạt động sản xuất, trong đó có sinh hoạt đối với các địa phương ở khu vực đồng bằng sông Cửu Long. Tuy nhiên thì mặc dù là chúng tôi đã có quy hoạch, nhưng là với cái đặc điểm là 95% cái lượng nước của lưu vực sông Mekong lại từ các nước ở thượng nguồn, từ Trung Quốc, Lào, Campuchia, nên cái vấn đề mà chúng tôi kiểm soát được đầu vào cho việc sử dụng nước đầu vào, đó chính là một trong những cái thách thức của chúng tôi trong phục vụ cấp nước cho cái sinh hoạt này. Thì hiện nay chúng tôi đã có cái quy hoạch tài nguyên nước trên lưu vực sông Mekong. Thì trong đó đã có những cái giải pháp tổng thể, trong đó phân công trách nhiệm rõ các bộ ngành, ví dụ như là Bộ Tài nguyên Môi trường, Bộ Nông nghiệp Phát triển Nông thôn, Bộ Xây dựng, Bộ Công Thương trong việc cái đảm bảo an ninh cấp nước cho sinh hoạt rồi. Thì chúng tôi cũng đang tập trung nguồn lực để triển khai các giải pháp đã được nêu trong quy hoạch tài nguyên nước lưu vực sông Mekong. Thì hiện nay thì chúng tôi bên cạnh đó thì chúng tôi cũng đang đẩy mạnh cái công tác tìm kiếm các nguồn nước, trong đó có nguồn nước dưới đất, đặc biệt là cái khu vực mà không bị nhiễm mặn, để cung cấp cho các khu vực dân cư có cái khả năng mà tiếp cận cái nguồn nước mặt bị hạn chế. Thì đây cũng là một trong những cái ưu tiên của Bộ Tài nguyên Môi trường trong thời gian tới, đó là cái tìm kiếm các nguồn nước để cấp cho cái vùng sinh hoạt và hạn hán. Thì như quý vị đã biết thì vấn đề về nước biển dâng hay vấn đề xâm nhập mặn, đó chính là một trong những cản trở lớn nhất trong cái việc mà phục vụ mà cấp nước sinh hoạt ở vùng này. Thì ở Việt Nam thì chúng tôi bên cạnh việc hoàn thiện hệ thống pháp luật thì chúng tôi hiện nay cũng đang về mặt ngoại giao rồi về mặt kỹ thuật thì chúng tôi đang đẩy mạnh cái vấn đề phối hợp với các nước phía thượng nguồn để đảm bảo làm sao mà cái việc lượng nước về phía Tân Châu, Châu Đốc ở Việt Nam luôn được đảm bảo, để chúng tôi có thể kiểm soát được vấn đề mặn và vấn đề hạn, cũng như đảm bảo vấn đề cấp nước cho cái dân sinh ở khu vực này. Vâng, xin hết ạ.
So we are now approaching to the end of the program, and there are still many questions in Q&A. Our team will collect those questions, and hopefully we will forward it to our panelists, and then they will have answered the question and then communicate with the participant of this workshop. So before we go to the closing session, I would like to say thank you again to our panelists, Mr. Virak, Dr. Siriwat, Mr. Mohammed, and Mr. Ha, for your passion and your contribution to this workshop. Thank you very much. So with this, I would like to invite Catherine to facilitate the closing sessions. Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Parady, and thank you to our panelists for that very inspiring and interesting conversation. There are many challenges but also opportunities around addressing water scarcity. I'd like to now hand over to my colleague, so Emily Barber, who's the Mekong program lead with the Australian Water Partnership. She's going to say a few closing words to wrap up the session.
Thanks, Catherine and Parady, and that was a really interesting discussion. One of the things that was highlighted for me today is the intractable nature of water, of water scarcity in particular. So we can't look at water scarcity without looking at negotiation between how we can actually share water between different users. One of the really interesting things about operating in a scarcity mentality is that it affects part of our brain to become focused on a scarce resource to the exclusion of other factors. Those of you in countries like Australia during the pandemic will have observed this in terms of things like the shortage of toilet paper. Like toilet paper, the perception of scarcity can really drive behaviour, and it's not always consistent with the actual risk that is present. One of the other things that we heard a lot about today was that the distribution and the types of scarcity are not equal, and they can perpetuate existing inequalities. So it's really important for us to look at solutions that respond to different contexts and different situations and perceptions around scarcity. In terms of talking about some of these solutions, with the challenges we see here, there's also a number of opportunities. And one of the opportunities here is cooperation about a common experience or a common threat. And for this to be effective, it's essential that we look not just at the physical scarcity of water, but we also look at the human context in which it exists. And we've heard about how this needs to be a collective effort and a meaningful collective effort, not just lots of meetings. As was also presented today, acting early is so much easier in terms of being able to manage a scarce resource. AWP is very pleased to have supported the development of the water scarcity analysis that's been presented here today. And it really aptly highlights the variability of the challenges for different places and people, as well as the opportunities that exist. This publication is just the start of our cooperation with FAO and with governments in the Asia Pacific region, as well as other partners on addressing water scarcity. So with FAO, AWP is pleased to be continuing this work with Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia. The first stage of this will run until early next year, and it's going to focus on developing a national water scarcity action plans for each country, a regional cooperative platform, and will explore the role of water accounting and allocation to manage and plan for existing and future water scarcity. So thank you again to all the speakers and panelists for sharing your perspectives today, as well as all the contributors to the publication that are listed here on the slide. The publication is now available. You would have seen the QR code that was just shown earlier. And a big thank you to everyone who has joined us to listen and for your questions today. We appreciate you coming, and we hope that you will join us for future talks and discussions. Thank you.